Well, no,
it's all good.
it's perfect that you're coming on, because can someone explain to the audience like they've never heard of it before, the red pill phenomenon, the red pill culture?
Okay, it just depends on who you ask, but since you're asking me, I've been in the quote unquote red pill space for going on 22 years now. I first got into what we now call the manosphere, but and by the way, there's a qualifiable difference between those two terms. The red pill was originally it came out of like sort of the pickup artist seduction community era, which was really the mid 2000s. And there were several forums that were going on. There's like the forum days, and there's the blog days, and then there's like sort of social media / YouTube days, which is where we kind of are right now. So everybody was sort of participating in forums, and then they participated in blogs and everything. And for the most part, it was a development or sort of a natural extension, I think, from this old school seduction communities. And so that was like, Mystery Method and Neil Strauss and The Game and
what was the demographic for that? Is this like a Gen X coming online in their early 20s or what?
I would say it's much more millennial than anything. Okay.
Right.
And that's a good question. Much more millennial. I guess you could say like the latter half of Gen X, but it was definitely a millennial thing. And essentially what it was guys coming together and just comparing notes, like what works best for where you guys are in, where you're at. Because remember, the internet as sort of like a global communication system at that time was just sort of starting to come into its own. There was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no this is like prior to any 2006. So it was like right around 2001 2002 is when these forums started picking up. And so there's, these guys would do seminars and they would do things like, live, hot seats and whatever. But that was pretty much it. Most of it was just sort of happened online on user forums, user groups, which became user forums. And then I was a moderator on one called So Suave, which by the way is still there, even, 20 some odd years later. But it was mostly like, how do you get a girlfriend?
Suave is that okay?
SUAVE. So Suave. Yes. Yeah. And there's another one called Alt Fast Seduction. There's another Venusian Arts. There's a bunch of other ones at the time. It would depend on which kind of like guru you kind of followed at the time. And I just had this kind of interesting fascination with it because I was going to college at the time and I was studying psychology. So it was interesting to sort of just see all this sort of play out in real time. And that's really where a lot of my work came from, was the forums and discussions, about 10 years of forum discussions. And the red pill as a sort of a term or a moniker developed out of that. We didn't even really call it red pill then. We just said it like unplugging from the matrix kind of thing. Like you used to think one way about how women were and intersexual dynamics were and human nature, like men's nature and women's nature, and what we've sort of been brought up with, whether it's in pop culture, or if it's by the church, or it's by your family, or by just sort of like interacting with people in a social sense. And then the difference between like the reality of it and sort of like what was what your own personal like expectations were. And so we used to call it unplugging from the matrix, and then that led into, oh, you just took the red pill kind of thing. And remember, this is like 2002, so like the Matrix movie was like 1998, so it was still kind of like fresh in everybody's head. And so that it was an apt analogy. And I can remember back in the day, people used to like, think it was really, really kind of cringe, but then suddenly right around 2017, 2018, everybody started using it again. But the red pill, as far as I'm concerned, is only concerns itself with intersexual dynamics. The red pill is the praxeology of intersexual dynamics, and that covers a lot of different things. A lot of people want to use red pill right now to sort of be a pet term for their political ideology or whatever they think is, oh, red pill's just the truth. Well, you can use it that way if that's what you want to, but the history of that term really originated in the old seduction communities, and that's the way I sort of refer to it.
So you had you're saying you had a ponytail at some point. That's what you're saying, right?
Ponytail?
You had a ponytail. Oh, you have a ponytail now. Okay. I was gonna say. I was like, okay, all right, I get it.
Well,
okay.
There is this one point Rollo brings up that's interesting, because the political forums around the same time and they're, these were all forum. I mean, years ago on the internet, they're watching a video took an hour, right? It took forever.
Download it, right?
Yeah, it took forever. If you got a pirated movie or something off of the internet, it took you 3 days of downloading, and then you didn't even know what you were going to watch, right? You turn it on, and you'd be like, "Oh God, it sucks."
Well, you remember that podcasting, actually, the term podcasting meant iPod, like audio.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah,
you actually would
yeah.
record it, and then you would actually listen to it back as if it were a radio show of some sort. But we call podcasting, what we're doing right now is technically podcasting, but like back then,
coom podcasting.
Yes, exactly. So, like what we take for granted right now, what we're doing here, all four of us in this thing, like we like just as far back as like 2016, 2017, it would have been very, very difficult to do what we're doing right now.
Oh yeah, it would have been. Well, it's interesting. I was just bringing up on the political discussion side. I had never until, I don't know, 2 years ago, heard of anybody use the term red pill as anything other than a political term. Mm-hmm. And that meant you had woken up to the fact that, the ruling class of elites are ruling your, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. Yeah, it was all designated around that. So I didn't even know. Like I when people started saying this, I was like, well, what do you mean he's a red pill? Doesn't that mean he's base, right? Doesn't that mean he's awesome? And then you tune in and they'd be talking about like degen shit, and I'd go, what the fuck is going on here?
I'll tell you what's funny is I see this happen in cycles, and we're in an election cycle right now, so I expect all of this. Happened in 2015, 2016, happened in 2019, 2020, and has happened like last year and this year as well. Is red pill as a term will skyrocket on like as a, usable terms on like Google if you go and you track it. It started right around 2015 because people wanted to use the red pill as something that meant like the alt-right, right? Or it meant, so you're a Trump supporter, you must be red. You took the red pill.
Yeah.
Right? Or you've got did you know that when Candace Owens was not Candace, the Candace one that we know right now, when she was on Twitter, her Twitter handle was Red Pill Black.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
2015, right? I still refer to her as Red Pill. Actually hates it because that's because everybody wanted to sort of jump on this term that everybody else was using. Oh, the cool kids are using Red Pill. Okay, I guess we're Red Pill then. That's gonna be sort of our tribal identifier during for the alt-right or for the I don't know, for the Proud Boys or whatever the hell was going on at that particular time. So people started using red pill as sort of an identifier for like traditional conservative Republican Trump supporting MAGA hat wearing individuals who are cut from that cloth, right? And that's not where the term came from. And I every time I bring that up at every election cycle, every 4 years, I have the same fucking conversation over and over again, where we're talking about what red pill means and what it doesn't. People will just say, oh, it just means the truth, man. I'm like, no, it doesn't. And you just simply don't know the history of it.
Is there crossover between red pill as you're using it and then the right? Does that valence?
I don't make that distinction because I don't necessarily talk about just strictly I don't talk about ideology. I don't talk about religion. I don't talk about politics. I don't talk about race. I don't talk about ethno-nationalism. I don't talk about, any of that stuff.
So you don't talk about anything that matters.
In particular. But when it crosses over into intersexual dynamics, and all of those topics do cross over into intersexual dynamics, then I do talk about this.
Now, Andrew, what's your take? I mean, your take on the red pill from everything he just said. Now in your position, what is it now, and what are we looking at as far as a dynamic or paradigm?
So let me start from the end and then work back to the beginning. So the question from Ben is there crossover? I would say that you'd kind of have to be a fool not to think so because of this. It seems that people on the right are much more open to the fact that we're living inside of a degenerate society, and they're actually kind of happy to point at female behavior and the degeneracy which comes from that as being, and feminism specifically, as being a prime cause, whereas the leftists and progressives highly endorse feminism, and they endorse women's lib and all this type of stuff. So when you see right-wingers who rage against feminism, it's easy for them to look at one of these guys who kind of operates off of this red pill, what you'd call red pill praxeology or this type of thing, and agree with them, right? They go on and listen to them and they're like, well, that fucking guy's right. Okay, these broads are out of control. This is insane. Repeal the 19th, right? So, anyway, right? You see them kind of gravitate towards it, and they see it, and so yeah, there's a bit of overlap, I think, there. But you have to remember that people are really politically ignorant, and they don't understand that the left is fractioned, but so is the right, especially online. And the right wing is not constituted of the alt-right and then the mainstream right. There's the dissident right. There's the alt-right. There's the mainstream right. There is the Republican light alt, which it would be like the Daily Wire guys and those types of people, right? We have views that aren't 100% palatable, but they're palatable enough. Into the alt-right, which is like, if we are not Japan by next year, it's over. To the dissident right, who says, look, there's significant issues which are going on that need to be examined in the core belief structures of the United States when it comes to the Constitution and when it comes to egalitarian principles and things like that. So there's a whole kind of different faction there. Though I don't see the red pill as being any kind of delineation of the right or left wing. It seems to me, and I've tried my best not to strawman their position, which I get mercilessly attacked for on Twitter, even when all I do is spell the position out without even, and I'll put a little note at the bottom, would be like, this is not my position. I'm just logically writing out this problem, right? And they lose their
not to do that.
Yeah, they lose their minds, right? They're like, no, you're siding with them. And I'm like, no, I'm just writing out the argument. But anyway, so I'll put this stuff up.
You're not allowed to do thought
experiments. And I'm just like, look, this is just a basic logical problem. It's a basic logical issue. I'm just kind of writing it out in plain English so people can see what they're saying. But I don't think they're trying to take a political side. They're just trying to give descriptors for what they see. So for me, they're the guys who are walking down the street and they're like, tree, rock, right? Soda can, a soda machine. And what'll happen is the people who are going behind will be like, so you like soda and you want people to drink soda, huh? And you're like, well, no, I'm just pointing out that that's a soda machine. And they're like, so you want everybody to get fat and obese, huh? You know what I mean? That's the distinction in the mentality from my perspective, from kind of what Rollo would consider the red pill and what I consider actual political discourse, which this gets sucked into because the right and the left both want to use kind of the RP stats to support their own narratives, either pro-feminist, against feminists, and that kind of thing. So
yeah. Well, does it fold in? Does the red pill procedural understanding of mating dynamics fold into some sort of eugenic ethno-nationalism? If you can force women to act in a certain way, then you can propagate a culture?
So it can be used by the alt-right types that way if they chose to. It can be used as the dissonant right types to say, no, let's go back to arranged marriages and let's go back to, polygamy or things like that. Or it can be used by kind of the center right types to say, well, maybe we should really take a look at suffrage and move more towards libertarianism and kind of shrink the amount of people that are allowed to vote via, land and things like this. So, and it can be used by the leftists to say, look at the right-wing lunatics who want women slugged down in the kitchen and beaten with baseball bats all day. So it can be and is used by each side for their own political agenda.
Yeah. Is there an underlining understanding that comes out of the red pill? I'm sure like you could. No. It's useful, like, right? You said it's a praxeology, so this is something that you practice, right? Okay,
so
but does it describe reality at all?
Okay, so the reason why I use the term praxeology is because it's the best fitting, system that I could probably come up with. Because the problem is that the red pill is not necessarily concerned with prescriptions; it's concerned with descriptions,
right?
So it's more about factual absolutism as opposed to just sort of like, is this right or is this wrong or is this good or is bad? It's not. I've illustrated and talked about the red pill in terms of like it's fire, right? You can use it to heat your home, and you can use it to cook your food, or you can use it to like set your friend's house on fire or set your buddy on fire too. So it just sort of depends on how you're going to use it and what you're going to do with it. So it's not really necessarily concerned with like uses or like, is this right, is this wrong? Now, a lot of people will take that, just Ben, more to your point, is a lot of people will say, well, doesn't the more realistic factual basis of what the praxeology of the red pill talks about is in terms of intersexual dynamics, does that align with conservative politics? Does that align with the conservative ideology or a leftist, degenerate Coomer, ideology? Like, yes, both.
Both.
It works for both. That's a thing. And as Andrew was saying, the minute that you start giving people like just hard data, hard statistics, say, here's what it is. All I do is basically get this stuff, write about it. I connect some dots and I allow people to sort of like, come to their own opinions. The problem is that's very dangerous on social, in the era of social media, because you can't give people hard data without telling them how to feel about it. Because if you don't, they will hate you for that, because they want you to tell me, oh, well, why is he even telling me this data? Because he wants to change my mind about something, and only a degenerate Coomer would tell me that, or only a MAGA hat wearing Trump supporter would tell me that.
Rollo, what you're trying to say is, we know what you mean, though.
So what you're saying is
that a female typical way, like needing moral?
Just see them on a open fire.
Oh no, it is, but it's totally it's a gynocentric view of everything. But that's what people do is if you present anything, which is it doesn't matter if it's an argument and you're just presenting what an argument is, and you're trying to be as good faith about it as you can. So you're like, here's premise 1, here's premise 2, here's premise 3. So you hate God, and you're like, let's say the argument is God's not real, and you just present it as a premise, right? Even though you're a Christian, you're just presenting the argument so that people can understand what the argument against you is. The first thing people will do is draw that down and be like, I see. So you're arguing against God because you hate God, and you go, no. I'm presenting this argument against, you know what I mean, the faith that I'm contending with
really fast.
Yeah, and they go ape shit, right? And it's because people apply their own biases when it comes to people that they hate, loathe, dislike, have a problem with, or this kind of thing, to anything that they say. So they map the things on to anything they say. They just kind of map it on as a position. And then whatever the worst position is they can possibly think of and the most uncharitable, that's your position now.
What would the red pill say about dealing with those kind of people? Does it have a protocol for that?
They would say, fuck them. That's it. Yeah. That's all they can say.
I would say this, and I've made this very clear on most of my podcasts, even Access Vegas, is like when people ask us, like myself or Mike Sartain, for that example, like what is there a elevator pitch? Is there some sort of like, can you describe what in a bumper sticker, can you tell us what the red pill is? And the problem with that is that it's not a bumper sticker. It's like a college course. Okay. It's like a college major. So if you think about how intersectional dynamics cross over through politics, as I was saying before, religion, just society, sociology, anthropology, psychology, evolutionary biology, and on and on and on. You think about how all of those subfields sort of cross over into intersectional dynamics. For me to say that the red pill is one thing or another, then if I give you one description of it, people go, ha, you didn't think of this, right? And no, I did. You just asked me for a 5 minutes, like introduction to, primer for the red pill. So the best way that I can describe it is the praxeology of intersectional dynamics. That covers a lot of things. It could be anthropology, sociology, psychology.
Wait, so Rollo, hold on a second. If there's no prescriptives and it's mostly descriptive, practice assumes that there's a proper practice, or is there no such thing as an improper practice?
Well, the practice is the descriptor. So what they're saying.
Okay. You just go.
So they're saying the practice is the description.
Gotcha. So the practice, the elevator pitch is actually just describing the elevator to the person in the elevator.
Right.
Yeah, it's just.
And he's like, who fucking cares?
Right. Well, right. I'll just give you the quick definition here. What a praxeology actually is here. Okay. So it's technically a philosophical term, and people will say, well, this is from economics. It's like from Mises or something, or Mises, whatever. And it's like, that it was used for that because what he talked about is technically a praxeology, but it's really a Greek word, not necessarily an economics word. But it is the praxeology is, let's see, the theory of human action based on the notion that human beings engage in purposeful behavior contrary to reflexive behavior and unintentional behavior. Okay. So what it means is that it's a term that it's a study of behavior in that behavior has a purpose or a function behind it. So there's like a latent purpose to that behavior. And what is that particular behavior? So it's not.
How does it account? How does it account for the value judgment of the description, though?
It sounds like practice. It's not a cognate with
Okay, so Rollo, what if the accurate description of most of reality and humankind is just that force wins, that males win because of force wins? How does your position, like from the red pill perspective and everything you're saying now, like how would you argue against someone who's in a part of your group or tribe or ideology? Say, he goes, hey, Rollo, force wins. Let's fucking do it. And you go, well, what do you say?
So there's a difference between those two. I could say, are you asking me as for my opinion? What do you think the best practices are? Or are you asking me from a perspective of describe the fact that here's how force wins, here's how force doesn't win. I can do it from both of those sides. So there's the practice of it, and then there's the theory side of it. So if I'm talking about just strictly praxeology, I can give you, here's why you come to the conclusion that force wins, right? I can tell you and describe that. Or you can ask me, well, what do you think? What do you think is best practices? And that's where people lose the narrative here, because the red pill, as far as I'm concerned, is that as a praxeology, it is describing a dynamic.
It's the Izot gap. So he's saying, it's the Izot gap.
You just asked, which is this: is it right? Is it wrong? Do you think it's best practices that we enforce our will via force? Right? That's a different question than what is force, or how does the dynamic of force actually work? So you're asking me, it's technically two different questions. So it's like, what do you think about best practices, and what do you think about the actual dynamic itself?
This guy in chat, he's like, I just love the word praxeology. It just feels good coming off the tongue. It's like saying praxeology makes me feel 5 times more intelligent than I did just a few minutes ago.
I've had people like throw this at me. They'd be like, praxeology, it doesn't mean what you think it does. And I go look it up. And they come back like 5 minutes later, like, okay, maybe.
That's what they call it. They call me and Jimbob in the chat all the time autist, because it's we look at the aughts, right? It's not caps. They're like, you're an autist.
I had to teach Dr. Phil what the word superfluous means. I think I can teach you what praxeology.
Well, I can't not look at the gap, though, because if we're talking about culture and how to influence culture, and if your ideology, or in my view, Christianity is actually the thing that informs culture, then, if red pill doesn't really have a position on where we ought to go, and we're just describing things, I'm just wondering to the limitations of participation.
That's the entire limitation, though. So like, you got the limitation right away. So it's like this. It's like, if you can imagine, and you make this argument, and I do all the time, actually, when it comes to science. Science can give us tons of descriptors for things which potentially could be true, but can't tell us what to do with them. So science might be able to tell us how to split an atom, but that doesn't mean we ought to build a nuke, right? That's the thing. Yeah. So I think that it's useful to have something like this around that can be referenced. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
The question is like, how do you use it? That's where I think the failures on that side are in. But I don't think they're trying to say that it's designed specifically to make the ought claims. It's only designed to give you these descriptors, and then you can do what you want with them.
The way that Ryan Stone and I sort of describe this, Ryan Stone's written a book called Praxeology, right? So people can sort of wrap their heads around this. But what we call the red pill really is the Chilton Manual of intersexual dynamics. Now, I don't know if you know what a Chilton Manual or a Haynes Manual is. Do you know what I'm talking about? Somebody has to know what a Chilton Manual is. A Chilton Manual is it's like the big manual.
Ben is feverishly Googling.
Taking those for later.
There's a particular case. So my younger brother is an auto mechanic, right? He works on like classic muscle cars and reconditioning. So you got Chilton manuals for like all these cars, right? Yeah. A Chilton manual is basically a manual that shows you where all the parts and all the numbers and everything that could build a 1969 Chevy Camaro, right? And every last part is there and shows you how they all go together and everything else. It doesn't tell you how best to drive the car. It doesn't tell you what necessarily the gas mileage is going to be if you use a particular fuel in it. It's not going to tell you, best practices and how,
some of them do.
Yeah, some of them might. But like the thing is that the point of the actual Chilton Manual is just to show you how the damn thing goes back together.
Okay, Rollo, I have a question. Can the red pill philosophy, the way you've described it anyway, can it tell us the value of like aesthetics and architecture?
It can describe the. Okay, so first of all, let me just explain something to you. The red pill is not an ideology. It is not a philosophy. It is not a belief set. It is not a sermonizing. It is not anything that has to do with a particular like as I said before, best practices. So when people say the red pill movement, the red pill philosophy, the red pill ideology, that is what I see people trying to force fit the red pill or the praxeology that is the red pill into this compartment that they think is an easier to understand, but it's
well
not,
would you agree that there's no practice that can be absent of philosophy that precedes it, right?
Yeah, so I think so Jimbob's saying like, look, there has to be a grounding foundation for why we want to know the descriptor of things. So he's saying there has to be some philosophy behind why it is that we even want to know what is true.
Well, is mathematics a philosophy?
It uses philosophy. Philosophy.
It's definitely a philosophy. The mathematics is philosophy. Yeah, there's in fact, or you could say that philosophy itself is a mathematic formula.
So the long and the short of it is this: is that as a praxeology, the way I look at this is that the red pill is a descriptor. It's not a here's what you ought to do. But as I was saying before, and as Andrew was saying before too, you cannot tell people, just basic information without telling them how to feel about it and what to do with that information. In fact, the very fact, if I'm going to tell you, about single mothers, I'm going to tell you about abortion, I'm going to tell you about, intersexual dynamics. The very fact that I'm telling you that means that I'm trying to convince you of something just in my telling. So when people say, you're an influencer, when you go and you put this stuff out there, it means that you have a certain belief set, because you wouldn't even be out there making yourself public or presenting yourself in the way that you are on these particular podcasts if you weren't trying to convince people.
Well, Maury in my chat
understand implicit bias, but that's not really what in its most idealistic form, what the praxeology.
Right. You're just trying to give descriptors of what is
objective
true.
reality.
Like Maury points out in my chat, he says the practice of breathing air or taking a poop, they aren't based on philosophies. So I think you can make the argument that yes, biological necessities, they're not necessarily based around some kind of, even though I think they are. There's something called ontology, which I think would cover some of that, but. Ultimately, I think at the root, what Jimbob is saying is if you're looking for a descriptor of what is true to begin with, then there has to be some kind of philosophy behind you even looking for that, right? What would be the purpose of the point?
That's why I talked about aesthetics, because it's people think, oh, well, let's talk about ethics. Well, some aesthetics and architecture and things do play into practice, actually, how we live our lives, how we experience the world. Obviously, in the West, we live in a very square, boxed-in system that's all about efficiency. And if you were to properly describe, Rollo, what's efficient, it would follow that if you wanted to be efficient, you would do away with unnecessary architecture and you would make everything square, right? And usable and quick, and you could tear it down and bring it up. Okay, This is the thing. This is why I bring this up, because what if your view could properly describe beautiful aesthetics, right? That was objectively beautiful and symmetrical, and yet in the same breath, the same description of the goal of efficiency trumped the aesthetics, right? And so I'm saying that because it permits that, it's like it's almost detrimental that it'll actually put aside one value for the pursuit of another. And so it becomes arbitrary. Well, of a bunch of praxeologists who are aligned with like a red pill view that you do, they basically just say, well, let's pursue getting laid, build efficiency, money, and this thing, and then no one else in that group could actually have a valid argument against that. It would just be kind of like whatever the trend said. Was good, right? That would win, right?
I don't actually understand that. So I'm thinking about what you're saying, and it makes sense. You're saying if all of you share the kind of social belief that all of these things that the red pill is stating are true, these are all truths, and one subsect of this takes these truths and say I'm going to act in accordance to this belief structure with
utility,
utility, right? With this kind of data set, you other people couldn't resist that I don't understand, because why couldn't the other side just take the same subset and then say, no, I have a whole different moral basis. I believe that what you're saying is true with the descriptors, but I think that the moral application is different.
No, you're right, Andrew. I mean that they could actually oppose it by just declaring a new goal, right? I'm saying they can't refute it foundationally. They can't argue why one is good or bad, or why you ought
unless
to
they
go
gave
one
them
or the other.
data that disputed the data. Right. That would be the only way to do it.
That's because what you're using is okay. So whenever I hear the words like good, evil, bad, this is good, this is bad, what I'm looking at is really, I think, from a praxeological perspective, is what are best practices and what are worst practices. Okay. So to get more to your point, if we're looking at a particular phenomenon and we say, okay, this is what is true about this, is we're able to, with all of our five senses and all of everything that we can possibly gather, the most hard empirical data that we can about this particular phenomenon, and we get to the point where we have, like I said, the Chilton Manual is almost complete. We go, okay, this is what is true. This is actually happening. It's a predictive framework. We can pretty much bet that this is gonna, 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4. If we have that as a foundational truth, now the question comes: what are best practices? What should we do or how should we use this information to make our lives better or to make other people's lives worse?
The basis that they're starting with, just like for you, Jimbob, and probably for Ben too,
right?
They're using the correspondence theory of truth.
Right.
So they're saying all of these things correspond with what is objective reality. So we use the correspondence theory of truth. That's our truth theory. All of these things correspond with reality, therefore they're true. And then they hit this delineation, and that's what Rollo is saying. When we hit this delineation of best practices, he's saying now we're getting into the aughts. So what do we do with that?
And that becomes prescriptive. But to see what I'm saying is that there's a difference. Like, I don't know if maybe you guys just see there's no difference between the two. But when I look at a phenomenon, we find out what is the most accurate description. How do we know what is true? Well, whether it's whether it's intersexual dynamics or anything else for that matter. But like, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to the praxeology of the red pill, it is an obligation to objective truth. What you do with it from there, you guys, like Christians can take it somewhere, Muslims can take it somewhere, Satanists can take it somewhere, anybody else can take it wherever they want from that point. But what I'm saying is that the concern of the red pill, or the praxeology of the red pill, is what is actually factually true. And then you go take it and decide what you're going to do. How is it useful? What's the utility of that?
So I guess, Rollo, I'm asking, from the view of the praxeology and the red pill view, can you accurately observe and describe the best?
Again, that's practices. So what is the best? Can you accurately determine that? You can certainly say, okay, well, as we were saying before, like, what is pragmatic, what is efficient, what is practical? What do we want to do with the knowledge that we have? Let's just say we have actually absolute truth about.
Hang on. He's not actually asking what you think, Rollo. So he's asking, no, Jimbob's not asking actually what it is that you think he's asking. What he's asking you specifically is, he's saying, when you say the word best, so for instance, if you say this is the best data, not what's the best application of the data, this is the best data
as far as what we have as the most.
What do you mean by best?
So that's another thing, is like when we are looking at, like, say, the Chilton Manual of the praxeology of the red pill, remember, it's not 100% entirely complete too. So it's what I've said before, is that we write down what we know to create, sort of predictive frameworks in pencil, not in pen. So it's like,
why don't you shut up, Ben?
Benji, what do you got? Benji, what do you got to say?
Listen. What do women want?
What do women want?
That's better. That's better.
They don't, Ben. Not you, Ben. They don't want you, Ben. No, it's because of the sweater, Ben.
I gotta go Mad Men on you.
Yeah. What do women want? That's actually a great way to get really into the culture where it matters the most. Is
what women want? More.
More what?
It's always more.
More truth. They want more Chilton.
Everything.
They want a more accurate Chilton manual.
What do women want?
I don't think they want more truth. Actually,
that's
I don't think they give a shit.
I don't know, a lot of that is really kind of like navel gazing. It's like, well, what do a particular? I mean, we can go and do a full show on like what do women want. If you want to talk about like as far as intersexual dynamics is concerned, like alpha fucks and beta bucks. That's basically what women want. They want the perfect amalgam of a guy who is a good dad and a good cat.
How is that not a good or a true or a beautiful? That's a description of the
or true or beautiful.
That is the red pill is describing what women ought or want.
It is until the Tinder swindler comes around, and then suddenly it's not as good as everybody thought it was going to be.
Okay.
So, like the problem with that is you're going to ask me like, what do women want? And I'm going to give you like sort of my most accurate like presumption of this from like what I've been able to sort of glean over the course of like 22 some odd years doing this. But what is good and what is bad? Like, obviously,
they want a tarot card reading.
Yeah.
do they?
That was the best comment I've heard tonight. They want a tarot card reading.
Rollo, do women want to be leaders?
They want scented candles.
Leaders?
Well, you actually, have scented candles, Ben. I know for some reason I have a feeling you have scented candles in your house.
I do not. You're trying to beta buck me, man. Beta bake me, actually. That's what's going on here.
Ever since, buddy, come on.
I know your tricks.
Yeah, not one scented candle, Ben. Not one.
No. The wife has a few though. I can't.
Well, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. Well, listen. I was at a cafe. It was really early, and there was this meeting of a bunch of Christian men. They had like their weekly meeting where they get together and like they work on their their issues. And they got into this conversation about God, and they all went on this real long, like this is what God is. This was good. Yeah, this is what God is. This was God. And they were all so certain that they knew what God was, or they argued with each other, but they spoke with so much certainty. And then the conversation relaxed, and somebody said, well, my wife did this, and I had no idea what she was doing by this, right? And they all like collapsed in their certainty about God, and they couldn't describe the person that they were sleeping with. Right.
Wow.
So the red pill, it sounds like the red pill is trying to describe that mystery that is woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's I was going to say this is like one of the core kind of, I guess, principles of the praxeology is that women, like from perspective like women's nature and men's nature, is that it's knowable. It's nothing mysterious or nothing magical or cosmic about it. However, it serves women's purpose that men think that they are in some way unknowable, like forces of nature or the feminine mystique, because the less knowable a woman is, the more she can sort of use that as soft power for men who have always classically been like covert or overt, physical power. Yeah. So, and the old saying is, what is it? Like, men conquer worlds and women conquer men. Mm-hmm. So, and how do they do that? They do it through soft power and covert communication. They do it through subterfuge and nuance. And women
do they conquer men or do they conquer weak men?
They conquer strong men very well. Thank you very much. It just depends. Like you can say, well, this man's weak or this man's strong. Like, do you think that, like, say somebody like Alexander the Great is a big strong man, or how about Napoleon?
Alexander the Great was gay, just so you know.
Yeah. Well, because Rollo, here's I want to summarize this.
A strong guy or a weak guy?
I want to summarize something important here. Is that when you say conquer a man, right? A man can be conquered by appealing to his own weaknesses of sin and appetite. And so a woman could actually capitalize on that, but I don't think it's the woman who's conquering. I think it's the man who's not properly managing their appetites or their weaknesses and their fleshly desires and things like this. And women can see that, right? And they go, oh, that's easy. Look at today's culture. I mean, it's entirely based on women being on the throne, right? And the men are submissive, kissing the feet, throwing all the donations, right? And then, I don't even think women want that, by the way.
Yield to the princess is now you go queen.
Right. So that's consistent description with the red pill, right? You guys agree and you go, okay, this is. Do you say this shouldn't be? Do you say this shouldn't be when you see this?
So put it this way: I can give you my opinion of this. Yes, it shouldn't be, but I can also tell you the praxeological perspective of it, which is it is what it is, right? This is what will happen if men don't have their shit together, if women are more, let's just say, fempowered or more in a position where they can take advantage of quote unquote weak men, or they can use, like, there's been throughout history, there've been very, very strong like alpha male men.
So it's better for men to have their shit together
because they were blue pill as far as with their women is concerned.
So Rollo, how do you properly, from the red pill view, praxeology, descriptive view, properly identify an inversion? Because here's the thing: if I say right now it's accurate,
give me an example.
Right, it's accurate to say women. There's this hypergamy, like women are elevated to a state of financial gain and status that is a result of materialism and weak men, basically, right, not taking the leadership role. So that's descriptively true, and your personal view is, well, it really shouldn't be that way, but that's my personal view. I'm saying, well, if you accurately describe something in reality, and we both agree that that's what's happening, right? How do you skip to accurately describing that it's actually an inversion of something? How do you accurately describe inversions?
So give me an example of that.
So it's an inversion that women have power. That's what I mean to say.
So you in a perfect world, men are supposed to be in power, but the inversion is women are.
They're always in power. Men are always in power. The fake out is that we can make it look like, due to luxury and modernity, right, that women are in power. The moment something catastrophe hits, or what I call it, concerns that go away with food shortages. The moment that happens, you start to see the true reality of things, right?
It's a luxury belief.
Feminism is luxury. And what I'm saying is, like, if you accurately describe what's going on, it's actually not true women are in power. So what I'm asking is, how does your view, like, if you're speaking on behalf of red pill and praxeology, how does it accurately pinpoint an inversion, a counterfeit, a lie?
What I would say is this. Okay, so if you go back and you look at men's nature, you look at women's nature, you have to kind of like rewind the tape all the way. Okay, so if you go back and you look at men's source of power, like what makes them, puts them in authority, and really for right up until strength,
smashing skulls,
exactly, violence. Was it you, Andrew, who got into the argument about what was it, about enforcing rights?
Rights enforcement
on whatever podcast. I love that part. I was watching that, and I'm like, oh, I hope he says this, and then you did.
Enforcement. So men's power comes. So this is my viewpoint.
Go ahead.
Is that all power and everything operates through force, whether you think so or not. When you're talking about soft power, you're talking about seduction. So you're talking about seduction, and you're talking about manipulation. And the thing that's interesting about that, though, is that that's a power men have too. And historically, men also can apply seduction and manipulation to great effect, but women can never apply force. They can't apply force. So what Jimbob's saying is that if
men have been able to over the course of it, because simply we're bigger, we're stronger.
Yeah, exactly. So
strength. And as you were saying before, feminism, and there's a lot of other like ideologies that go along with this, but those are what Robert Henderson has called luxury beliefs. We are only able to entertain those beliefs so long as a society maintains a certain level of
luxury.
Affluence. And once it drops, then suddenly we go back to caveman days, and we go back to gender roles, and we go back to sexual dimorphism, and was a division of labor. All that stuff happens once you get down below a certain level of affluence. So that's pretty much a given. But in a natural state, like in in our hunter-gatherer days, like, were men the ones that were making the decisions? Yes, they were, because they had the capacity for violence, and they had it probably a whole lot more than we do now.
So are men nothing but weakened by the progress of technology? Is technology robbing men of their strength, and therefore men aren't getting their shit together, and therefore men are weak because they're not stronger than technology?
Yes. From my perspective, yes. Okay. So, but again, defining the phenomenon between men and women aren't physically weaker. Women are also, you have to remember that women were, and still are, the incubators of the next generation. So when you look at our evolutionary past, a woman was usually pregnant most of the time, from the time she was probably about 15 or 16 years old, and had a series of children where, be fruitful and multiply. But remember, women are the vulnerable sex. They are the ones who have to be protected by the strong sex that is going to, fight off the saber-toothed tigers and bring home the meat and hopefully share the meats along with everything else and be parentally invested in that woman, because she's the one who's going to be pregnant most of the time. And if she's not pregnant, she's also doing caregiving and nurturing for those children as well. And remember, human males, the reason why we are where we're at right now is because we have gigantic heads, right? Most babies are born premature. We have giant heads because our superior, the reason why we're the apex species on this planet is because we're the smartest sons of bitches that were ever created, right? The way you do that is you have to have a very big head with a lot of synapses and a big brain, right? You have to pass them through widened hips in a human female, and that makes her vulnerable, okay? A human baby cannot reach like self-sufficiency until it gets to be about 6 or 7 years old, right? For instance, like say like a horse or a giraffe, they can run within a half an hour after being born.
That's right, they can.
Human children need a lot of fucking investment. That's why it's parental investment, theory. Okay, call it evolutionary prattle. You could, I don't care whether they were created that way or that way. The fact still remains, we got big fucking heads, okay?
Yeah.
And we have to be passed through a birth canal that's tiny. So we have to pass them through. They have to be taken care of for a very long time. These are simple facts. So you could go see this happen right now, today in 2024. Okay. So
just not very often anymore.
From a physical perspective, women have always been the vulnerable sex. So how do you keep those very fragile children and those very delicate, vulnerable women? How do you keep them alive? With very strong sons of bitches with wide shoulders and biceps and greater blood flow. I have this list of all these.
Well, and that's what technology. If you look at the evolution, not the biological evolution, but the evolution of technology. What's interesting is that if you kind of trace it back to the beginning and you start to look at the things that we cared about the most, it was all based around infrastructure and comfort. And the reason for the technology being based around shelter, things like this, is for this exact reason. So the technology is there and exists there, not to protect women from the saber-toothed tiger necessarily, but to protect them from the thing that kills them the worst, which is nature. Nature is the thing that kills babies and kills women. Women used to die from this thing called hearth death. Have you ever heard of hearth death?
No.
Okay, let me tell you what hearth death was. So this was actually something, I'm not even kidding.
I've heard of girth death.
Yeah, if you go back to early America, women used to cook in their fireplace. There wasn't a stove. Okay, they took their cauldron. Yeah, hearth deaths. Okay, whatever. Okay, so anyway, they would actually catch their clothes on fire and burn to death. And this was actually common. This is more common than you think. Their dress would catch on fire and they would fucking burn to death. They'd be running around like a Roman candle in their house, right? because of art that, and it's not a joke, right? Nature.
So they have smaller skulls. You're saying women have smaller skulls.
Yeah.
So how do you? And maybe more to your point here is, how do you keep very fragile children alive, and how do you keep vulnerable women who are, for the most part, either pregnant or they're nursing or they're nurturing the next generation? How do you keep them alive?
Keep them alive with men.
You keep them alive with men who are, from a division of labor, from a sexual dimorphism perspective. I don't care whether you want to call that evolution or creationism. It doesn't matter in this case. The fact of the matter is that, yes, are men more powerful than women? Yes, they are. And designed or evolved that way makes really little difference in this situation. But again, what I've just done is I've given you the praxeological perspective on why that dynamic exists in the first place. Now, so is that right or wrong? Well, it seems to me that it's worked out pretty well for, 200 years so far. So yeah, until we had hormonal birth control and everything went to hell.
Is that the line? That's the line where the power dynamics completely go.
Exactly. Because
control.
Women have become less dependent on the resources and the provisioning, protection, and parental investment of men. That's exactly what hormonal birth control did. And
so the echoes of their biology is messing them up. If there was a pill that solved women's desire for stability and strength around men, Like that would solve the sexual revolution,
Well,
sexual
we don't-
evolutions.
I actually got into it with, I think I'm probably one of the few people who've ever really pissed off Dr. Phil, but I pissed him off with this, is that men have become superfluous after the sexual revolution. They're nice to have around. And you'll hear women say this on every damn podcast, but they don't need a man, but they want a man. Right.
They do need a man, though. That's just
Oh, yeah.
descriptively
That's
false, though, right?
Exactly what.
Okay, got you.
Thank very
Okay.
much, because that's
Yeah, yeah.
exactly what I told Dr. Phil, and he was like,
Yeah.
"What's superfluous mean? I don't know." I have a degree in psychology. I've never heard the word superfluous.
Well, I have a degree in sociology.
I have a degree in sociology.
I have a degree in sociology. In case you were wondering.
But Ben, I would definitely, if you go and you look at like where the marriage rate starts to plummet, if you look at where divorce rates start to skyrocket, if you look at, I'm doing this series on the decade between 1965 and 1975 right now, and if you go back and you look at when was no fault divorce initiated, 1968, right? With was it Ronald Reagan in California, I think, to facilitate all of the divorces that were coming into the system because of the hormonal birth control.
Okay.
And then, of course, after that, now we have the, what was it, 1971? What happened in 1971, children? We went off the gold standard. Okay. So what happens then? Oh, now we can give women credit cards. Feminism wins. No, actually, the insurance
No.
companies and the
Yeah,
banks win.
Big fail.
But you go ahead, you go, girl, Betty Friedan. It's all on you. And then we have so no fault divorce. Then we have Roe v. Wade, which is what, 1974.
Mhm.
Yeah, somewhere around there. And then we have Title IX, and you see all of this just progressively goes up. So all these things that we see skyrocket up to 2024, they all come back to 1 year, right around 1965 to 1971, somewhere in that area right there. And what major technological innovation happened or became, I should say, more popularized in Western society? Hormonal birth control.
Yeah.
And we
You can actually see these trends.
And that, by the way, goes back to your eugenics question.
Yeah, well, in Europe, this happened before.
Eugenics, basically, is what it
Yeah,
is.
this happened before, though. If you look at the trends, it's actually hormonal birth control was newer in the United States. It had already been out in other places for a long time. I've always kind of disagreed a bit on this point. I remember we kind of had a bit of a back and forth on it, but I do think that there's no doubt that birth control contributed greatly to the sexual revolution. It couldn't have even been done because all those women would have been out screwing and all gotten pregnant, right? so that would have been a big problem for them.
What's more interesting, and I understand your point. Like we talked about this before, and I showed you the graph between like the correlation between the rise in hormonal birth control use and the rise in divorce at that time, which happened much of at least 5 years prior to actually having the no fault divorce initiated. So essentially, I mean, my theory is that no fault divorce was the inevitable outcome of all these divorces that were coming into the system because they couldn't keep going like, okay, who screwed over who's cheating, they just couldn't do it because they were so inundated with these divorces. And they also wanted to put women into the workforce at that time. And if you look at, again, go back and look at the graphs. If you look at 1971, you see that our production in the United States skyrockets, but the mean wages stay the same.
Yeah.
Right there. So
Andrew, are you sorry to interrupt?
Workforce.
Andrew, are you saying like all your interactions with people like Rollo and other people from the red pill community, if you will, are you basically saying, yeah, you guys are accurately describing some things, right? I would agree with, but for fuck's sake, pick a side and point in a direction, right?
Yeah, so my beef here is that I think that the red pill, as it were, by the way, David Patrick Carey, I don't know if you've ever met Rollo Tomasi.
What's going on, Rollo? How you guys doing?
Maybe
How's it going, David?
Cheers.
Yeah. Welcome to the convo. But so my big issue with it when we go back and forth is I don't think that they can make good claims for what people should be doing. But the more that I engaged with them, I found out something interesting. The guys who are really into this don't actually want to. That's not their goal. Their goal is totally different instead. So their goal actually is just to say, here's a data packet, do what you want. Because if you're not informed about what's even happening, you can't even make those odds, right? You don't have the core information which is necessary for you to even make those ought claims for these descriptors for society. So what I did was, instead of going, yeah, fucking degen scumbags, is I said, look,
Once in a while, you need to do that, right?
Yeah, instead of that, why don't I actually try to take your information, apply it to my worldview, and see how it fits? Well, interestingly, it's a 1-to-1 almost from the Christian worldview. Let me explain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the Christian worldview says it's really it's optimal if you maintain chastity until marriage. And the red pillars go, yep, that's true, because these men, they sure like those women with low body counts, and they sure like these women to not have their baggage. So the red pillars go, yep, you Christians are right about that. And the Christians go, okay, you should probably get married young because it's better for fertility. The red pillars go, yep, that's also true, and it stops feminism, and it stops all sorts of things that they could get into if you marry them at 18, 19, 20 years old, right? So you start mapping these on one for one. You go,
perfect world.
Yeah, you go, holy shit. We actually agree with a whole lot of these descriptive claims here, right? When they're applied to our worldview. But then here's where all hell breaks loose, where the tires come off.
And then there's Pearl.
Right. Yeah, where the tires come off of this car and the fucking thing turns into a wreck is this. The red pillars come out, they're like, listen, let me tell you what's actually happening right now. What's actually happening is that this small subset of men, about 10% of them, they're banging all the chicks. All of them. Not some of them. They got all of them, and they're just smashing them like no tomorrow. And by the time they're all done smashing these chicks, and all these chicks want one of these particular guys, so they're all competing for them. Right. And then by the time they're done and they realize, oh, shit, I'm screwed. I've hit the wall or whatever. And I'm never going to get one of these guys. You can then have her. She's there for you. To go ahead and pick up and go home with. Right. And so the Christians look at that and they go, the second they hear that, they go, Rah! Because they can't envision that female mate selection could actually be that primitive. But when you look at all the data, you look at all the polling, and you look at all of these dating sites, the dating sites are the big tells, right? You look at Tinder, you look at all it's always the same story over and over and over. So then they get into this fight over degeneracy. And what the Christians say is, look, what we want to do is convert society to Christianity so that we don't have this kind of like overage of a degenerate problem. And the red pillars go, oh, well, that's nice. And here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is these chicks are all going to go bang these top 10% still. And then when they're in their 30s, you could pour some fucking holy water on the whore's head and marry her up. That's literally this whole fight summarized, okay, in like the best way I could possibly summarize it. That's what's going on. Now, I do have a solution for this, an answer to this. And I have a debate coming up where I'm going to really get into this because I really do have a great answer for it. But that's the fight.
Yeah.
So Andrew, why is it that red pillars aren't just becoming Christian? What's this? Why are they two different positions then?
Yeah. Here's why. All right. So, yeah, go ahead, Rollo.
You go. No, I was gonna say.
Okay.
I wrote it. It took 3 years of my life to write an entire book as part of the series about that. But continue.
Oh, well, I was just saying the reason for this is because the red pillars are like, well, that's nice. You can go ahead and you can even take this top 10%, this top 10% tier of men, and you could make them all Christians tomorrow. The problem then still doesn't go away because what'll happen is those women will still vie over the top 10% of those Christian men until they're 30. And then when that happens, you marry them up. They barely have any children. You might have them chased 30-year-old virgins, which might be better, but chances are pretty good that out of that 10% of men, they're going to have some moral failings. They're going to have some, oops, I slipped my dick in her. Right?
So Andrew, what you're saying is like a 7 male should be more aligned with, marrying and procreating with like a 5 or a 4 woman, right?
No, this is a problem, right? So you'll hear this from the other side. They'll go, what about the force? Look, if you're 7, just settle for 4, because men will do that, right? They don't care. They're like, hey, you're super nice and you cook really good, and we have sex every morning. This is great. Let's get married and live happily ever after, even if you're a 4. But here's where the rub is, right? Even the 4s want the top 10%. They don't want you. They still don't fucking want
it's luxury.
You.
It's all luxury modernity.
Yeah, it's all that's exactly right. It's
but this is what I just talked about.
One step further, they feel like they deserve, and then
that's true.
Exactly.
It's a fake thing they're interacting. Go ahead, David.
Well, that's what Rachel and I recently talked about with this whole Christ pill, red pill thing that emerged. There's this real naivete within Christian dating, assuming, again, some part of the Christ pill narrative that I've seen online is that, like Andrew says, you make an altar call, you get baptized, and now these girls are repented and everybody gets together and it's, happy ever after. And it's like, no, hypergamy still exists within Christian dating. Getting genuine desire and attraction from a woman still exists, because we're talking about submitting. So we're talking about a more traditional role. And so a whole point of Rachel and I's conversation is that, look, if you look at parts of the red pill, we can agree with all these things in regards to building the right sexual dynamics, even within a Christian relationship. It comes into these larger moral claims that, yeah, we would say we have more of a prescriptive remedy to the descriptive reality of the red pill.
Right.
But there's a real naivete online that somehow if you just take the Christ pill, you swallow the Christ pill and now you're going to get married. It's like, no, guys, in Orthodoxy, for example, we have a massive growth of young men. 70 to 75% of all new converters are
because of
men.
me. Because
and so
100% because of me.
We have all these women. We have all these young men, and then some of the women in the parishes, and they still are not getting married. Why is that? And it has to do with genuine attraction and all these same secular things that women are affected with. There's still, and it's not that we don't have grace for these women. So there's a middle space, but there's a totally naivete in regards to the Christ pill, and it's totally unrealistic.
Did you say something about
over on David?
Good, Benj. Good, Benj.
Just like secularism is tied to genuine attraction, or giving into one's genuine attraction is secular.
Reality is
reality secular.
In regards to the intersexual dynamics, that, for example, a lot of young men have difficulties just carrying on a conversation, and so building interest in a woman and just being able to form these relationships.
So intimacy.
These are I mean, like secular skills, but all of this is going to be necessary. So when the red pill, I wouldn't subscribe with aspects of what they would remedy the degenerate situation we're in, but we still have a problem with getting young men and getting young women and the women wanting to occupy these traditional Orthodox Christian marriage roles.
Rachel May, fat guts. Yeah, even Christian women don't want fat guts.
Right. Well, that's the thing is so take a look, for instance, Jimbob. If you take you and Benj and Rollo all together, right? The only guy here who can match David Patrick Harry in looks is me, right? All of you ugly fucks, not even close. So, but
yeah, nice beard, by the way.
Fuck you. Tell him, tell him, David, how hard it was for you.
Yeah, so I've been a content creator, been an Orthodox Christian, and trying to find a wife. It took me over 3.5 years to find the woman that is like excited to occupy this role and is with my mission. And that's where I talked about aspects of the dating world are true in regards to the red pill, and it's still true with the Christian world, and it's not easy. And so and that's where the average Christian guy, that's why they appreciate the content, because I tell them, I get it, guys. Like, it's not easy, even when you're in the church, even when you're around women that want traditional men, because we're still talking about a lifelong commitment. We're not interested in drag the guys. Other stuff.
You need to drag the guys from Iron Disciples into this conversation at some point. I don't know if you're familiar with the Iron.
Yeah, I know those guys. Where are they at?
They're in Sarasota, Florida, but they've got their own podcast and stuff.
If they're available, they can pop on.
Sure.
So it sounds like
you can send them the link, bro.
Go ahead, Benj.
No, is the sex dynamics worth the bother if nobody's procreating? If you take procreation out, is it worth the bother?
No, that's why they're not procreating. So this is the key, right? So
there's the juice worth the squeeze.
Yeah, this is the key. If women are willing to wait, if they're willing to hold out for a long period of time to get what they consider whatever this demographic of the top 10% is, this is where you come into the problem. If by the time they are ready to settle down, they're in their 30s, let's say, right? How many children are they going to be able to have versus when they marry at 18, 19, 20, 21? It's going to be a lot fewer, and more of them are actually going to, have stillbirths and have birth defects and things like this. The rates astronomically go up, especially after 28. And if you look into the numbers, if you look at the United States, we're the only developed country really in the entire world that is having an increase in infant mortality. And this is not due to a limited access in medical care, which is what the dumbass progressives say because they're fucking idiots. It's due to the fact that women are having children later and later in life. And so that's one of the key reasons that the birth rate has plummeted, not just because of the pill, not just because of abortion, but because they're having children later and later in life.
Yeah. Well, why have kids?
Yeah, if you could just coom all day, right? And there's you don't see any
or wine cat mom.
Wine cat.
Other.
All right. Well, the JP Morgan article said that 45% of American women are going to be single and childless.
Okay,
by 2030.
Can I step in on that one, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
We'll butcher that one even more. Okay, so that's from the Morgan Stanley. It's called Rise of the She Economy. It doesn't say anything about childlessness because they'll probably still have kids. They'll just be single and have kids. You can actually do that if you're so I love it when people throw like I've even seen like what Patrick Bet David was throwing that. I'm like, God, what the stop. That was from it was a forecast Morgan Stanley back in 2018. Yeah. And they were the prediction is that 42% of women that are in their prime working age or demographic, which is 25 to 44, will be single by 2030. It didn't say anything about childless, but like the presumption is that most of them will be.
Right.
But the idea is that, but remember, you don't have to be married to have kids today because 42% of children are born out of wedlock as of I think 2020 was the last time I saw that stat. It might be more right now.
So the thing is, people are acting because of convenience and luxury. They're acting primarily on immediacy and convenience. And so when people make choices about these things, they're basically saying, well, why the fuck would I do that? Right? That's like a 20-year choice. Why would I make a 20-year choice if I don't have to right now? And so it seems to be a massive problem. And like Andrew said, it doesn't matter if you're red pill or secular or Christian, just like David Patrick also said, is that if you don't fix this issue of the values that you put on your life and your decisions, if they're not like in a long-term storyline, like your entire life, like what is your life going to be? It seems like there's no way out of the immediacy taking hold of men and women, right? So we're both at the effect of this, and luxury, and the irony is that we have this technology where all five of us could get on the fucking thing and complain about it at the same time, but it doesn't. It's still true though. It's like how do I teach my daughters and my son how to teach them how to operate outside of immediatcy? I don't know the answer to that. I honestly don't know the answer.
Is that impossible, Andrew? Andrew's shaking his head.
No, it is possible. Absolutely possible. And I'll tell you why it's possible, because it's a concept that's called grand strategy. And if you've read anything by, was it Robert Greene? No. Well, it comes from that. Yes, that's actually the term, but it's grand strategy. It's seeing the war instead of the battle. Okay, so for instance, and I came to this after doing Fresh and Fit so many times with young women who are like 19 years old and they've got like a body count of like 20 plus, partners or whatever.
Which isn't that uncommon.
So it came from dealing with women who are very young, who are like 18, 19 years old, they're just living in the moment, right? They're what are called temporal provincials, right? They don't care about what happened in the past. They don't care about what happened in the future. They only care about what happens right now. And so,
at least they don't have any baggage with that philosophy.
Ben, you know who does?
It's erased.
It's erased. Is the woman who is between the ages of 29 and 31, who is now going, oh shit, I need to get my life together. Oh shit, I better get with a guy before the lights come on at this club, because I better be able to leave with somebody pretty soon, because they are no longer able to compete in that sexual marketplace the way that they could when they were 18, 19 years old. So when they get to that point, which is what I call the epiphany phase, that's when they find God, and that's when they come back to church, and that's when they want to make you wait for the pussy that she just gave to the guy like 2 years ago at the club, right? So that the whole thing happens right around 20, 30, 29, 30, 31, which, by the way, is the 30 for women is the most common age or average age of first marriage for women. So that's when they have this sort of epiphany right there. And what do they say? I need to find a guy. I need a dude with some benefits.
Truth lights.
Truth lights. I'm done with I had my fun in my fun in my 20s, and now I want to get serious. I want to get right with God, and I got to find a guy for the long haul. The problem is now that they're at that point, the guys that they want are hitting their stride. They're starting to get into their peak potential years, and they don't want to have anything to do with them. They want to get with a woman who's younger, because now they have the options to actually be able to do that. So what happens with me is when I talk to these women, they go, Rollo, how can I find a husband? Where are all the good guys? How come they're all intimidated by me? How come they're all why do they have fragile egos, and whatever feminism is sort of feeding them as like sort of the rationale du jour that helps them sort of cope with the situation that they're in at that point. And now I'm comparing the two. I got the 18, 19-year-old girl, and I've got the girl who's like, say, 30, 31 years old right now. And the problem is they never thought about the future. They never saw the battlefield from the God's eye view of the battlefield. They were only right there. And it's the difference between grand strategy and just taking one battle at a time. And they get to the point where they go, oh, I should have thought and planned, like you were saying before, I should have thought and planned out things a whole lot better than I actually did. The problem is if their fathers, their brothers, their uncles, a wise male says, hey, you should really start thinking about grand strategy. That sounds like chauvinism. That sounds like misogyny. That sounds like you're trying to control their lives and to take some sort of fiendish manipulative power over them by saying, hey, you might want to think about where you're going to be in the next 10 fucking years. And they don't want to hear that, because that sounds like what they've been taught is patriarchy.
Oppression. It's oppression.
Yeah. But that's what the church and the true patriarchy is for. Because the church guides the men, because the men are focused on God, and then the men can actually be the leaders that spiritually lead the family. Mm-hmm. I think that's why, again, the point of the conversation is that the religious framework at least already provides that sort of God's eye worldview from what the meaning of a life is.
The problem with that, Dave, is that, and this is I think the biggest failing of Christian conservatism today is that it is 100% responsibility for men and 0% authority for men. So you have all the, like, I hear Ben Shapiro, I hear Matt Walsh, I hear Candace Owens, you name the guy from freaking Daily Wire or PragerU, and I will tell you it's the same damn story, which is the way we're going to turn Western society around is if men would just take more responsibility. It's like they don't have the authority to enact that responsibility in the first place. So all the responsibility in the world makes
who's taking their authority from them
to enforce
that doesn't make any sense. So this is like hypo agency longhouse thinking. We don't have any authority, just like assert authority.
What's authority?
Okay, so you don't have in a gynocentric social order, just what I just said a minute ago.
Legally?
Legally,
just leverage in the dynamic of a relationship
socially in the first place, because everybody wants to say that a marriage ought to be 50-50, right? Well, everybody's an equal partner or a co-equal partner in this thing. In fact, you'll hear people they don't even refer to their husband or wife as a husband or wife. They refer to it as their partner, right? So there's this idea that there's this egalitarian equalism between men and women. As we were saying before, who should be the leader? Who should be the one who makes the calls? Who's the captain of the ship? Who's directing the course of that family and that marriage and everything else? Now, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, it's the man, right? I mean, whether you read it in the Bible or you just look at it from just simple.
And who bestows that on the man?
Dimorphism. The man is the one who's providing protection, provisioning, and parental investment for that woman. It used to be, patriarchy, by the way, is a much more balanced system than what we have right now. Because patriarchy, in its idealized sense, meant that a man had responsibility for his wife, his kids. You know, if his kids were like criminals, he was guilty of the crime. If the wife sent the house or sent the business into bankruptcy, he was the one that was responsible for that. But he also had the authority to rule over the wife, for the authority to rule over the children and make decisions for those children and have them defer to his authority.
And the authority came from somewhere. This is just I just get a little I follow you guys up to the point where you say, well, but men don't have any authority. It's like, wait,
not now anyways.
Where does that come from?
Still. We do still have the authority, because what you call egalitarianism, as Andrew argues a lot, is that it's still upheld by pure force. So the men still have the muscle, and they're still using it to some minimal extent. It's just that their balls have one of those rubber bands around it, like you do with the cows, and so they're kind of like wobbling around, right?
But who did that? Like, who's responsible for men not having authority?
Men did that.
Why?
Well, because they fell trapped to egalitarian. No, they fell trapped to a false doctrine.
Yeah.
That's why Christianity is so important, is because without Christianity, you have no oughts. You just have praxeology where you're just describing things to death.
In tying what Jimbob and Rollo were saying, I would agree.
Useful. Put it that way. You have to make it useful. Go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
I was going to say, I agree with you, Rollo. That's why, again, as Orthodox, I would argue theologically and philosophically that the errors of the Reformation and really the errors between the Great Schism of the Orthodox Church in 1054 and the Catholic Church have led to presuppositions of progress, be it theologically, philosophically, and now in this idea of just general Western society and this belief of moving towards utopianism, and that Protestantism can't save us. And I firmly believe in the next couple generations, like it's going to die out, because if you just look at the average age and you look at what's happening in culture, it can't resist it because it doesn't have a sacramental reality in regards to that everything that we believe is actually true. In addition to the semiotics and the archetypes, the Petersonian language that people want to use Christianity for, I think it's all that. So it solves it provides the ultimate prescription for the red pill. But I agree with you in the state of Western culture, and that Christianity is absolutely weak and deserves the mocking that it often gets.
What do you mean by Petersonian, you know? It's like fuck you.
No.
Back off, fucko.
I really need a sound drop for Peterson.
I think the big problem, almost what you're saying is true, but there's kind of a net problem, which is that as Protestantism dies, and it is dying, and the reason that it's dying off is because they're becoming secular. People are leaving those churches in droves. They're just leaving them as fast as they can possibly.
It was upstaged by more Protestantism.
Yeah, like a brighter one with more colors.
Yeah, right? But I mean, it is. They're leaving it in droves, and you see the kind of traditional churches exploding in popularity, and it's not just here; it's globally. It's global phenomenon.
I should point out also that this is not just a Christian thing too. This is also for Muslims, for Jews,
yes, for everybody.
Yeah, traditionalism.
The feminism has gotten into everything.
I mean, it's like pretty much across the board. And the reason why I can say that is because, like I said, I took about 3 years of my life to do the research and everything for my third book, or my fourth book, which is religion. And my book on religion was really an effort, let's just say, in trying to sort of explain the red pill in religious terms and like why things work. Now, Ben, you were just saying a minute ago, like, you know, secular truth versus religious truth and stuff. Like, the one thing I would say is this: is I think that both can be true at the same time. So, for instance, I think that like a secular truth can also be a religious truth on top of everything else. So if I go and I say, well, the Bible says you shouldn't have sex before marriage. Well, that actually makes pretty good sense in an ideal world. And I point that out in my book. Also, prearranged marriages make a lot of fucking sense. Like from a pragmatic perspective, if you're blending two tribes and you realize your very young daughter can't make really good decisions for himself, or your son doesn't know what he should do. And if you're a wise man, you say, hey, I want to, make sure that I want what's best for my daughter. I want what's best for my son.
But that only lasts because of the tightness of the knit of the community, right? You have to have that reinforcement of
for instance, the way I pointed out is like proscriptions on like sort of like foods, right? You halal foods versus haram foods, right? Versus like you're not supposed to eat shellfish or hoofed animals or unclean or pigs or whatever like that. But the practical reason for that is because you're going to get trichinosis and die because nobody knew how to like cure ham back in the day. Now, is it still a religious doctrine for some religions, for Islam and for Orthodox Jews? For sure, I'm sure it is. But the latent purpose of that is that we don't want our people to die. We don't want them to eat shellfish because there's something in the shellfish that's killing our people, right? So it's a secular truth. Is it a best practice not to eat this animal until we figure out how to make bacon taste good? Yeah, it is. It made sense at that time. Now, is it like, well, it's handed down from God and it's in the Bible and everything? From a religious perspective, makes sense. From a secular perspective, also makes sense.
Right, okay, this has a limitation, though. This has a limitation, sorry, Ben, is that not all things that are practical are moral. And so you could present someone with a situation where what's pragmatic for them and what's in the best interest for them based on their wants and needs and desires is actually not the moral thing to do. And so now I agree that there are some descriptive things that might be parallel. It's just that the limitation is when it comes down to the wire, doing the right thing isn't always the pragmatic thing. Go ahead, Ben.
Well, no, I was just you were talking about how you package the prescription somehow, whether it's secular and you appeal to people's rationality or truth or mythology, you appeal to people's imagination and emotionality. Those are communication tools. It's obvious that you're seeking truth. I don't understand the good. And I just come back to, if men have responsibility but no authority, like who grants men the authority? Is it a divine right of kings? Is it a mythology? Or do we convince? It's violence. It's force. We don't have the convenience of violence. We don't have that. We're not going to do that.
Yes, ultimately, that's exactly what's going to happen.
It's eventually going to happen. So eventually we're going to either repeal the 19th or unmake the birth control pill, or just descend into chaos and everything gets a hard reset.
Here's what
you heard it here first. Benji wants to repeal the 19th. I'll say
I would like to know how everyone is going to do that. I would love
force, the same way we gave it. Force.
Yeah, there's inevitabilities, right? There's inevitabilities to decadence.
So, let me see if I can go ahead, Andrew. Finish.
Yeah, well, there's inevitabilities to decadence, and we can look at the societies before us, which lasted for hundreds or thousands of years, but we can always see what happens when you have egalitarianism, currency deflation, and decadence. And every single time, it's a predation.
Is it ever corrected?
Yeah, it does. It always corrects, in fact, but it always.
Is it ever intentionally corrected before disaster?
It can't be corrected.
No, you're headed for disaster, Ben.
Okay, so I just wanted to know how black this pill was.
It's not. It's not a.
It's actually white.
It's not a black pill. It's the opposite.
No. Just slightly gray. It's slightly gray.
Sometimes people really screw this up in their heads. They're like, "Well, what kind of doomsday scenario are you, Mad Max bullshit, are you talking about?" And I always say to them, why is it that you would think that a correction coming that eliminates a lot of that decadence? Why would you think that's not the white pill? That's the ultimate white pill. That's not doomer shit.
But you can't accelerate it, though, Andrew. We don't contrive and accelerate the destruction, right?
No.
That's where people run off.
Well, the whole point is this: you're going to have one of two things, and you're going to have this in every society, in all times, in all places, everywhere, no matter what. They're either going to be decimated by war or decadence. That's what does them all in. Ultimately, in this particular society, all the Western nations, its story, all of their stories collectively are always going to go the same. Once decadence sets in, strong men and totalitarians will rise up and they will seize power every single time. And then a correction will happen, and then comfort comes in, and then when comfort comes in, democracy comes back in, and then egalitarian principles again, and then you rinse and repeat the same fucking cycle over and over and over and over and over, and that is exactly what's going to happen to the Western nations, because we've seen it happen before. We saw it happen during World War II. We saw it happen in the early stages of World War I. The entire 20th century was an entire kind of bird's eye spectrum of what happens when egalitarian societies become too decadent and turn to strongman for leadership. Well, all hell breaks loose and society begins to correct. Suddenly you have baby booms.
Andrew, what do you mean by hell? Oh, sorry.
I don't chase booty.
So what we're looking for is the alternative to this. And the alternative to this is Renaissance. So you can either have this or you can have Renaissance. The women's lib was a female Renaissance, is how they perceived it. This is us finally correcting the horrors of the system and this kind of thing. But if decadence becomes too pervasive, you tend to see Renaissance the other direction as well. And you can easily end up with that scenario. And that's the scenario that we prefer to move and guide to, rather than the alternative.
This is why the pressure point comes down to that men have responsibility but no authority. Like, listen, if you want a Renaissance, then men have to claim it. You claim it. You perform.
There you go.
Perform. You make the beautiful. You make the good. You proclaim it.
Absolutely. Preach. Keep going.
You plant the fucking flag and take it. Yeah, I'm with you.
See,
no argument.
I think I'm somewhere between Andrew and Ben in this case. I'm going to quote Coach Greg Adams really quick. Hope is not a strategy. However, hope is a necessity because we need imagination. We need to be able to push forward. We need to think what is possible. And so I'm only going to disagree with Andrew in the sense that I don't necessarily believe in circles, right? I don't believe in like cycles, like in this sense. You've probably seen the meme where it's like, was it weak men create hard times create strong men create, good times create weak men. God, okay, we keep going in this circle. Well, I don't know if you guys have seen any of these movies. I think was it 1918 or something like that. I think it was on, but it's like, if you look at what was happening right before World War I, everyone thought it was going to be a quick war. Everybody was just going to have a good old time until they met the first 50 caliber machine gun, and they were mowed down.
Gun.
Just like mowed down in droves, right? And that's what put into the minds of the kids during that time. It says, you know what, this is not going to be like our grandfather's war. We're fighting for our lives in here on an industrial scale. What I'm going to argue is that the next like collapse, the next meteor, the next war, whatever, we're going to run into something very similar. It'll probably be AI. It'll probably be like automated, like robotic weapons that'll just like gun down people in so much, carnage that we won't even, it'll be on a wholesale.
I don't know. Porn. You could say that porn is the carnage. Porn is the machine gun that just killed masculinity.
Who needs bullets? Who needs bullets?
Very good analogy, but it's one of many. Okay, so if you look at say hormonal birth, let's just even go back to I present this in my fourth book, right? When we talk about like in the Bible, right? There's the tree of knowledge that Eve ate from, and so we have the knowledge of good and evil, right? I look at it in these terms. It's like we have the atom bomb. Okay, atom bomb, atomic energy was an apple that fell off the tree of knowledge. Hormonal birth control, an apple that fell off the tree of knowledge. Now we have to deal with this shit, right? Now we have to figure out how we're going to make this work. Bang. 2000, about year 2000, the internet comes out. Now we have worldwide communication. We have globalization on a scale that we're unprepared for, right? Then we have social media. Then you have porn on a globalized scale. However we want to look at it. Next thing that's coming up, the next apple to fall off the tree, I think is probably already AI, and it's probably going to be automated weapons, and it's going to be just like the efficiency of killing people and ruling people in such an automatic way that we're simply not prepared for it, just like the kids weren't prepared for the first 50 caliber machine gun that killed all of them in World War I. That's why I don't think that there's going to be some sort of cycle. There's no pendulum that's a swing back. You only get to go forward, and you have to deal with that shit. I'm not saying don't learn from the past, but going forward, you're going to have to deal with the shit that's coming down it. And you know what? You're not even prepared for what you're going to see on the next.
You're not advocating a Kaczynski, abdication of technological society and its discontents.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying deal with it. Perform, just like you were saying a minute ago. Yeah. I don't necessarily, I know Aaron Clark is going to shit all over me for saying this, but I don't believe in enjoy the decline. Okay. Because eventually you get to the bottom of the decline. Eventually you're fucked. And I don't want to be fucked. I want to be able to deal with it. And that's exactly the way I teach my daughter and everyone who I have an ability to educate is like,